So yeah, when you say spirituality, how does spirituality show up at different levels of development? What are you meaning by spirituality?
Okay, great question. I would say, as a beginning tentative definition of spirituality, and we can bounce this around and refine it, but I would say spirituality is that the core thing with spirituality is that it is any activity or experience or way of life that the person who's engaged with that believes represents some kind of contact with a deeper or truer or higher reality.
Basically outside of the material, so metaphysical, literally.
Metaphysical or deeper physical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some forms of spirituality that are still quite materialistic, but they would look for a deeper meaning in the material. And it's what the person who's engaged in that would believe that represents. If they believe or experience that to represent something higher or something deeper or truer, then we could refer to that very generally as spiritual.
Okay.
How does that sound?
That's a good starting point. Yeah. We don't, yeah. As long as we're clear on what we mean by it, then we can proceed on that basis. Yeah. So you're interested in exploring how that is experienced and expressed through the different levels of development, using the spiral dynamics model as a kind of as one of those models.
Yes, that might be interesting to see how, as we evolve, as we develop through the levels, how people's or our perception and experience of what we believe is deeper or truer or higher actually changes. Which it must do, I would have thought, in some sense.
Sure. Okay. You want to start at the top or the bottom?
Oh, bottom, always bottom. Start with the easier ones, the less complex ones, I think.
So does beige actually have that? Or is it so taken up in everyday survival and the material world around it that it's not even thinking about or not even experiencing something deeper? It's just in the now, not in a post-cognitive way, but just with like what's here now. So therefore there is nothing beyond what's here now. Do you think?
Yes, I mean I'm inclined to think that the preoccupation of beige would be to just survive. It probably wouldn't have the space to consider what is higher or deeper or truer.
And is it about consideration, or is it just about experience? And this kind of takes us into purple, because I think there was definitely an experience of another world in the kind of purple tribal awareness. But I don't think they sat around discussing it a lot. So there may not have been consideration, and there may not have been, but there was experience.
Yes. Well, I think it's both. It's both experience and consideration, and how they interplay. But beige purple, it's going to be more experience, because maybe thought and language hasn't developed enough for there to be very much interpretation going on at those levels. One's working a lot more with instinct at those levels rather than thought.
Yeah, my sense is that and I know none of, just to clarify, none of these value systems exist independently. You've got the warm express self and the cool sacrifice self colors, and there's always more than one active. So it's a bit artificial to talk about beige separately and purple separately, but we're doing it for the exercise, whereas beige purple would be likely to be coexisting, right, in some awareness. But if you just took beige, then I would say there probably isn't any spirituality in the way that you defined it.
Okay.
Because there's
Yes.
a full engagement and presence with everything that the five senses can capture or engage with in the moment, as it were. But then with purple emerges the experience and story, I guess, around fate and there being other forces at play, other entities that maybe not everybody has access to, but certainly the shamans or the wizards or the whoever would have access to, and which others therefore get a direct experience of and have great respect for and fear of, I'd say. But it's, I think, an experience of a reality that's not embodied in a person outside of the current reality, but it's very much a spirituality embedded in the material. So the spirits are related to the trees or the rocks, or they're amongst us, as it were, very much amongst us. Yeah.
Momentarily, let's go back to beige.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody was to say, well, beige is about unity, you haven't really differentiated from the environment in any significant way, you're very much embedded. Why is that not the unity of the mystic? Why is that not enlightenment? That somebody could potentially ask that question, because there's a lot of confusion around this issue, I think. A lot of New Age narratives talk about how we were once enlightened in the old days and we lost it. So how can we make it?
I think you're right. It is an experience of unity, but it's not there's no conscious experience. You're just living very connected to and alert and aware of the world around you. But in your definition of spirituality, you always said there's something more beyond or something deeper than the visible world, let's say, that you're engaging with. I don't think that was the case.
Yes, I agree.
Just heightened, the senses, I think, were heightened, then very, very alert and very kind of aware of everything in the physical world around you. But I don't think there was an experience of something beyond that.
Were the senses heightened because that is what was required for survival at that level?
I think so, yeah.
So at purple, as you were saying, what is it that changes, that leads human consciousness to start attributing or understanding natural phenomena in terms of spirits and hidden realities and hidden entities, which leads to the kind of shamanic spirituality that starts to emerge at that level? Is it that we start to look for intentionality behind natural phenomena? I mean, Michael Shermer, are you familiar with Michael Shermer's work?
No.
Michael Shermer is a psychologist who, his thesis is that one of the reasons religion developed early on is that the mind is programmed to look for intentionality behind things. So it suddenly starts to rain, or there's a storm and 20 people in your village die. The mind will say, well, why did that happen? Who caused this? What was the intention behind this? What was the reason behind it? It starts to look for explanations behind things and intentionality behind things. Could we say that's what starts to possibly begin to emerge in some way at purple? And then because of that, we start to see personified spirits behind natural phenomena like wind and rain and the passing of people and so on. Is there something like that going on?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's certainly that stories around cause and effect and intentionality emerge there, which means that actually it's also the beginning of linearity in some way, although more related to cyclical linearity. You know what I mean? It's
Right,
like
right,
cause
yes.
and effect, but related to, okay, now the seasons are changing, or now, you know, the ritual has been completed or hasn't been completed, or so it's related more to the cycles in that sense.
Mhm.
The thing I was thinking when you asked the question, like when you move from beige to purple, they're still very much focused on, you're very much focused on yourself. There's not much aware, you know, the other is there either as a danger or a threat or a support to you. I think at purple, what happens for the first time is we start to experience relationship.
Right.
So we actually start to get a sense of me and the other, but not yet in the sense that it's separated.
Right.
So there is a sense of distinction and definition, but somehow an experience of them being related in a way that they are kind of moving around each other, as it were, more like a kind of web, a dynamic web. And so what that would imply is at the moment that we start to develop an awareness of the space in between in the relationship, the question arises, well, what exists in that space in between?
Right.
Right. So what exists in that invisible? So there's you and me. I've moved from just being kind of focused on, you know, me and surviving and niche, as long as you look after yourself and you help me fight whatever, then you know, good. And then I kind of look up, as it were, and you know, the others create safety. So this is the thing with purple and the awareness and the development of the tribal consciousness is it is a survival instinct at one level. If there's more of us working together, we have more of a chance to survive. But then we start to realize that there is something that connects us, something in between.
Right.
And I think that's what, you know, that's the context within which we can tell stories about what is it that lives in between. So if it's me and there's the tree, oh, and there's something in between. What is that? You know, and so we maybe tell stories about that. Maybe that's it. That it's also about what is it that if there is, if we start to experience relationship, and there's not it's not a cognitive concept at all at this point. It's an experience of it.
Yes. Yes.
We also start to experience the relationship.
Right.
So there's you and there's me and there's the relationship.
Yes.
And I think the experience is actually the experience of the relationship. It's like of the strands in the web between the nodes. And so that's when we tell the stories of the relationship, of the strands, and therefore, kind of cause effect starts to come in, or fate or destiny starts to come in. You know, often they talk about web. So in the Anglo-Saxon culture, it was the web of weird.
Yes.
They referred to, and it was really the web that connected everything up. Where, you know, you would see the flock of birds doing something, and then that would signify something. It's like someone pulls on one strand of the web, and another bit of the web moves somewhere else. So I wonder if that's it, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what you said earlier is that at purple we begin to develop a sense of other, in which relationship can develop, but it's not truly completely other. in the way it might be, say, by the time we're at blue.
Yeah.
So it's as if the other members of our tribe, our group, are an extension of us. They become, they're still a part of us, but not in the way that it was just me at beige, but the me has expanded in a way to include the other members of my tribe. And all the tribe together forms a web, if you like. And I wonder if the spirituality that starts to emerge at that level, because we start to experience the tribe as a interconnected web of these seemingly other people or extensions of me, this is where the kind of web of life spirituality starts to begin. The film Avatar, you've seen the film Avatar, that kind of nature embeddedness spirituality, that kind of nature spirituality, where the web of life itself becomes the arena for our spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Because that's how we're starting to experience others, our tribe, the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I mean, there's stories around people who, when they're in a tribe and they're then actually expelled from the tribe, who would literally die, not necessarily because of the lack of food or water or whatever, but because of the separation.
Yes.
Being enforced. And so there's something, it's really, I think, and remember we're talking about the first of the we colors, so the first of the sacrifice self kind of collective colors on the spiral.
Yes.
And so the foundation is relationship, not the individual part. Right. So I think in the purple, that's the spirituality is in an experience of relationship, but it's not yet, and it's panentheistic, in that it's whatever that spirit or whatever is in everything. Not something up there that's separate. No. It's in everything.
Would it be panentheistic, or would it just be pantheistic?
Pantheistic and entheistic is when it's in everything, right? And pantheistic is when it's just everywhere. Is that it?
Yes, panentheistic is when there is something that's transcendent, but it's also immanent.
Yeah.
Whereas pantheistic is there's no transcendent at all. It's just in the world.
Yeah. Then I think it's probably the latter. Then I think it's probably there wasn't that experience of the transcendent.
I don't think the transcendent has emerged yet. I think the idea of a transcendent spiritual realm emerges at blue, I think, for the first time.
Yeah, interesting. So the focus is on the relationship, is on what connects things, but in the experience. Yeah.
And is this the level then, talking of the kinds of spirituality that we might engage here, is this where magic starts to emerge for the first time?
Yeah, in the terms of how we often define it, I think, because our focus goes on keeping the relationship healthy, or appeasing the spirits.
Right.
Or, if we believe that there is an invisible entity that mediates the relationship, and the relationship is the key, because that's what, that's in purple, that's the key, then you've got to do everything you can to keep the relationship healthy. So then practicing rituals to appease something that is invisible to the normal senses would be the normal thing to do, because that's the most important thing, is the space in between.
Yes. And these spirits, the invisible spirits, would they be seen as, because they're invisible rather than visible, would they be seen as being part of a slightly higher realm, or are they entirely in the same realm? They're just invisible instead of visible. Where is this invisible realm? Is there any kind of hierarchy in these kind of early shamanistic views? I mean, when a shaman does a journey, is he just going deeper into the current reality, or is he moving out into some other higher or lower reality? Or is it not even defined in those terms?
Maybe more of a parallel reality.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Certainly,
sense.
I think for most people's experience, it was a realm that was frightening because they could feel it had effect on their lives, but they had no access to it and couldn't see it. And that's why the shamans were obviously held in such respect, because they could bridge the worlds.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah. Certainly in the Norse stories, there were like 3 different worlds.
Yes.
And the spirits that existed before became gods and goddesses in those realms later on.
Right.
That would be the kind of shift from purple to blue more.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in Hinduism. In the early Vedas, you had these purple deities who essentially were there to be placated so that you would survive. You would have a moderately pleasant life.
Good harvest.
Yeah. Exactly. Whatever was needed at that time in history to survive, and I won't say prosper exactly, but to survive and have some well-being. And those same Vedic deities became the later Hindu gods and goddesses when Hinduism evolved to a more blue system of belief. So, for example, in the Vedas, you had the deity Rudra, who is a kind of an angry god who had to be, it's a god you don't mess with, who had to be placated. And much of the Vedas is detailed instructions for how to do rituals to these spirit gods to keep them happy. And this angry Rudra god, by the time you get to blue, more sophisticated blue Hinduism, becomes Shiva. And then a much more sophisticated transcendent philosophy emerges around Shiva.
Yeah. One thought that comes to mind is, so as we develop into that phase and become aware of the space in between things, that feels like that's also the space of the archetypal. So that in fact these different spirits that then become gods are actually reflections of the psychological archetypes, which you then also see coming back in the planets, astrology and things later on.
Yes.
That we're somehow accessing awareness of like core patterns that are influencing things, but not as differentiated as in the material. So, and it makes me think of like the I Ching tree, where it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 15, 32, and when we get down to the level of matter, it's differentiated incredibly.
Yes.
But when you get up to the archetypal, so the levels before that, you've got patterns, as it were.
Yeah.
Kind of seem to pre-exist the differentiation into the material.
This could relate to what we were talking a couple of weeks ago about how the whole becomes the subject and object, and then how the subject and object becomes multiplicity.
Yeah.
It's kind of the 1 becoming the 2, becoming the 4, becoming the 8, and so you're starting to see differentiation. And those early patterns of differentiation effectively become your pre-rational archetypes.
Yeah, because once you get differentiation, you by definition get relationship.
Yes, exactly.
More than one,
yes.
There's relationship between the two, or between the four, or between the eight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those archetypes are personified into spirits and later on into deities.
Yeah.
So placating those, if in effect, becomes symbolic for placating our relationships for the sake of our survival, because we realize we can't survive alone.
Yeah.
So we want to keep the web happy, if you like. We want to keep the web running smoothly.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, because at that point we don't have that, or don't experience ourselves as having power over, let's say, an ability to control the environment around us. You know, we're very much dependent on it. And so the placating and making sure that the relationships are good, more in a felt sense, obviously, than a cognitive sense still, was
Yes.
key. Yeah. Because that's with purple, you know, the more stronger the relationships and bonds are, so the more that you're connected to, the more chance you have of surviving, you know, because the stronger you are, because you have a bigger team, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
That includes the trees around you, if that includes, you know, the animals around you, the earth that you're on, if that all feels that you're connected to all of that, then yeah.
Would you say the film Avatar is a good example of purple spirituality, or is there some trans there as well? It's
Yeah, I think there's some trans there as well, definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely kind of beyond, because they talk and there's a rationality and everything in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you could see it as a kind of society that hadn't transcended and repressed, but that had transcended and included.
Right.
The pre-rational.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It was a long time ago I saw it, but yeah,
Yeah, same here.
Definitely has a lot of that in it. Yeah. So red's interesting.
Yes.
Stage, because it's that first stage of individuation and swings back to the warm express self side of the spiral, where the focus is the part rather than the whole.
Right.
Part rather than the relationship.
So red emerges because the individual now feels constrained or constricted by his tribe.
Yeah.
And he wants to have some measure of autonomy, control, power.
Well, one could say that the yang has kind of starting to get lost in the yin and needs to reassert itself again and come back to the other side.
Yeah.
So the balance it was getting out of, you know, it's like a pendulum. It's getting out of balance and now it needs to swing back. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
To bring in the next level of yang, which would then add complexity to the previous level of yin. So in general kind of point around the spiral. So the difference between purple and blue is quite literally red. So blue equals purple plus red complexity.
Yes.
With then its own additional kind of emergent qualities. But yeah, there's a lot of people still see it as like linear, one after the other, but the swing between the poles is critical, because it's that yin yang dance, really.
Yes, yes.
But we swing back now to the red, or to the warm colors, yeah, and the red.
So the spirituality at red would be a spirituality that is aimed at, whereas purple was about keeping the spirits happy so that we can all survive, red is now about it's about spiritual power.
Yeah.
So it's about plugging into spirits and gods and deities in order to achieve your own egoic, emerging egoic ends.
Yeah, essentially red with that sense of separate self becomes incredibly scared because it realizes, there's me and there's everything else around me, and it's, it can all affect me, and so therefore tries to assert itself on the world around it to be able to control it and somehow therefore increase its survival chances. So yeah, any spirituality would be in that context.
So is this where you get your, say, in Norse mythology, you get your gods like Thor, these kind of power gods, or in Siberian, Mongolian mysticism, you get, I think, is it Tengris, who was the deity Genghis Khan appealed to give him power and become this huge emperor. So these become power gods who will grant you individual power rather than the safety of and connection of purple.
Yeah, so if we go back to this idea of archetypes, like, let's imagine that essentially it's all archetypes, the same archetypes, but that the way we relate to them changes as we go up the spiral.
Yes.
So if they're basic archetypal energies, then in purple we're trying to maintain a good relationship with them. In red we try to use them and or dominate them if we can, but then that would have to be in the using a different archetypal deity, let's say, to influence that, to get on our side. But it's definitely kind of dark wizarding kind of stuff where it's
that's interesting. Yes. So is this, I mean, in magic where they talk about the differentiation between white and black magic or light and dark magic, is there a sense in which the dark magic is more related to the individual pursuits without any regard for the whole, whereas the light magic, it comes out of the needs of the many, the collective?
Yeah, definitely more so. And the thing is, though, if red had managed to evolve healthily, by which I mean it would have transcended and included purple beige, then that kind of egocentric magic, let's say, would have emerged in the first stage of red's evolution, where it was pushing away from purple to create space. But then it would have wrapped it back in again. And it would have been, I think, the use of magic or the spirituality would have been about the power of the individual to support the collective.
Right.
And then what it became, because of the split, the separation, was the power of the individual to dominate the collective.
Right.
And that's what defined, our evolution ever since then, I think.
Yes. So that quest for independence and power seems to be the key as to what differentiated red from purple and ended up repressing purple.
Yeah.
And that's what we call ego.
Sense of separate self, if you just use the psychological. Ego.
Again, in Hinduism, throughout the early Vedas, we see a strong purple religion. We do rituals to keep all the gods happy. But then something happens around about 1200 BC or 1000 BC, something like that, and we start to see in the early Upanishads, we start to see mention of the other and how fear arises when there is a sense of other. So there's a very well-known verse, I think it's the Chandogya Upanishad, I might be wrong there, where there's a verse which says, where there is other, there is fear.
Yeah.
And we could see that as an early expression of red as it starts to emerge out of the purple Vedic mind, where there was no other really, there was just this unified collective. And we could see parallels to that in every culture.
So the spirituality then becomes a lot more proactive, let's say, than it was in purple, where purple is about keeping the harmony in a way of that world that you have a sense is there. Whereas red is now, okay, can I get them on my side? You know, can I ally with them?
Exactly.
Can I
Exactly.
bring them into me so that I can use them versus the other?
Right. Exactly.
Versus the
Yeah.
threat.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
I diminish the threat around me by actually activating more those forces? Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we use, we use the deity now for our own entirely selfish ends now.
Yeah, you know, and
Uh,
it's interesting because I don't think at Red you argue who has the right, which deity is right or not.
no, no, no.
But you do argue about who has the strongest deity.
Right, right.
And so this is funny because you allow, so the diversity of deities is allowed to coexist, but it's
Yes,
becomes a battle of the deities, right?
exactly.
And then it's only when we get to blue that we actually start moving into this one truth thing,
Right.
where it's either, you know, yours is no, you're actually wrong, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So the quest for power emerges earlier, or the quest for power and strength emerges earlier than the quest for righteousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
So morality in the religious sense emerges at a later stage than just this quest to get the God on your side.
Yeah.
For your own power quest.
Yeah.
Could this be related to where followers of different deities war against each other for supremacy of their deity?
If it was that, the distinction would be, yeah, not out of not out of a loyalty to their deity because somebody else has dared to claim that they have a god, you know, not like kind of Christianity versus Islam or states or whatever, but more like the battle of the chieftains, you know, to see,
right, exactly, yeah,
which is okay, who's the strongest god now, you know, and if this team wins, then okay, you know, we admit, you know, we won, you lost, and if you're a good loser, then, you know, but your god is still allowed to exist. It's just seen as lower down the pecking order,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. It's subservient to
Challenger
our
god.
God.
It's like boxing, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah. We're roughly the same age. Do you remember a TV series in the mid-70s, late 70s called The Feathered Serpent?
No, that's like the Questcoat or.
Yeah, that's exactly that kind of thing. Yes, it was starring Patrick Troughton, who was the third Doctor Who in the 60s, and it's exactly what we're talking. It's about ancient South American tribes going to war with each other purely to show which of their gods is the more powerful.
Yeah, that would be the Red expression. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So then the Red swing, the swing back from the Yang of Red towards the Yin side gives us blue, because Red has created the differentiation, and the seek is then for more order in the chaos. Because when you've got all these gods battling each other, and you know, it's a crazy world. It's the Wild West, basically.
Yes.
Wild West of deities, and so so there's an attempt to create a kind of overarching belief system.
Yes.
So I think in Red, the deities were slightly transcendent, but they were still very much here with us, right?
Yeah.
And we could talk to them and engage with them, and like we were kind of on a footing with them.
And that they also possessed all of the normal human follies. They were not morally superior to us. They were just a bit more powerful.
Yeah.
But they could also be, you know, cunning and lying and stealing and adulterous and all kinds of stuff.
In their drinking halls and
yeah,
everything else.
Exactly. Yes. So they were just, you know, projections of us in a more powerful role.
And archetypal role. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I think the other dynamic that triggers a move from red to blue is that Red starts to realize the limitation of the power of his God and the limitation of what he can actually do with his God. I think he starts to realize, well, there's quite a lot of things that my God can't actually do. He's not all powerful. He has his limitations. And I think out of that emerges the need or the discovery of an all-powerful God, of a one all-powerful, all overarching principle.
Yeah, but the reason for that is, if you think about it, like the underlying pattern is this swing back from the yang back to the yin, so from the I to the we, from the differentiation to the interconnection. So as that impulse comes back in, and you've now got all of these red kind of differentiated gods battling each other, well, how do you deal with that impulse to then try to connect it all up again?
Right.
So you keep the God thing, but in order to connect it up, you've got to have something that transcends all these battling parts, in parallel with the movement of a king to transcend the tribal chieftains. Literally,
Right,
the
exactly.
parallel movement. And of course, in blue, the king is the direct, relationship to God.
Right.
God and the king.
Yes. Exactly.
And then the rest, then the peasants, basically, or the nobility, I'd say, and then the peasants.
I mean, we see this very clearly, I think, in maybe for the first time in ancient Egypt, because you have the pharaoh, who is the supreme authority over not only the country but the empire, and the pharaoh is seen as the pipeline to God, the one pipeline to God or to the gods. And this is, I think, where we see the rise of monotheism as well. So,
can you just interesting thought? So, the pharaoh, like in the West, what happened is you had the state in a way with the king, but then the church developed,
right,
in parallel to it, right, and ultimately the priests, kind of being the main connection to God, would have appointed the king as God's appointee. But in Egypt, was the pharaoh both, or was he more the king and then you had high priests who mediated between the king and the gods? Do you know?
Yes, I think it was the latter. So you had the pharaoh, who was the supreme authority, and he appointed priests, and the priests would then mediate between the king and God, or between generally the nation and God. But it was all very much in the king's control. The pharaoh could order the high priests to be executed whenever he was in a bad mood, so which wasn't quite.
You make sure you've got the priests who are going to mediate in the way you want them to mediate with God.
Exactly. Yes. Which I think was different to Catholic Europe, where I think the church probably had more power than the kings.
Reminds me of the Supreme Court in the US.
Yes.
Battle for influence. Anyway.
So spiritually speaking, I think we see the rise of monotheism at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So biblically, we see Abraham being called. Abraham came from a Mesopotamian culture where there were lots of different gods and deities being worshipped, and they were being represented in idols. So then Abraham got a calling for the one God, Yahweh, who cannot be represented in an idol because he's invisible. And in fact, idolatry is a sin, because you can't reduce God to that. That's an insult to God to try to represent him. So this is the one true invisible God who's in charge of everybody else.
And for the first time, truly transcendent. So
truly transcendent
of the material. So out there, which meant that it wasn't a question of proving that your God was strong. It had to be taken on faith. So in red, it could be quite well the case that if your tribe lost and your God was proven to be weaker, people would go over to the other one because they're likely to be more protected by this other God because he's proven himself stronger than this one. Whereas here, you just have to take it on faith that it's God's will, even if you're suffering, and
Exactly.
losing whatever, it's God's will. And that's a major shift, that you're putting your faith in something that you have no evidence for. You have no, that's what you're being
Yes,
told.
I mean, in the story of Abraham or the story of Moses, you had these long periods of time where God has made a promise to take them to the promised land, but then they suffer for decades. They don't see any evidence of this for decades. The Israelites wander around the desert for 40 years, and Moses even dies before they get to the promised land. Abraham and his people go through all kinds of tribulations before his heir Isaac is born, that was promised to him. So it's not a question of getting that immediate visible result by doing some kind of magic with the deity. Here you enter into a covenant with the deity, with the one supreme God. And then you have to trust his promise, however long it takes and whatever you have to go through. I mean, I think in Abraham originally, I think the name of that God was Elohim. And then Moses came along sort of, 400, 500 years later. And his God was Yahweh, which became the modern Jehovah. But a lot of historians or archaeologists believe that Yahweh was originally a mountain god of the Mount Sinai. So he started off as this very purple god, specifically located on this one mountain. And Moses effectively transformed him into this one true God for the whole of Israel, the whole country. But even at that stage, there was no denial. They didn't believe that the other gods didn't exist. They believed that these other gods existed. They were just lower down. So there are even passages.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there are even passages in the Bible where God, Yahweh, the supreme God, is sitting on his throne, and all the gods of the other nations come along and sit in court with him, but they're lower down and they have to obey Yahweh, who's the supreme God. So it doesn't go immediately from lots of gods to one God. It's lots of gods to one God who's in charge of all these other gods. And then by the time you get to high blue, these other lower gods have disappeared. They don't really exist. And then you've only got this one God. And also he tends to be very male in blue. You've got a very strong male figure.
When I was just thinking, like, why were people so angry with other people for claiming that they had a different one God, and to the extent that they would, go to war and everything? And the thought that came to me was that if you're having to take something on faith and suffer, right, and in the belief of something that you've never had any proof of, and somebody comes along and says, oh, but you're wrong, there isn't a God, or your God is the wrong one, then that might be true.
Oh, yes.
And therefore, but there's no way you're going to accept that, because then all of the suffering that you've been through and the faith that you've had would have been for nothing.
Exactly.
So you have to defend your faith to give your life meaning, because otherwise your whole life and everything you've done would be exposed as a sham.
Yeah, it's all been for nothing otherwise. Yeah.
Therefore you have to,
Well, I think the people, those believers who are the most emotionally reactive to having their faith challenged are probably those who harbor their own secret doubts the most.
And the ones, I think, who have sacrificed the most.
Yes, exactly. Because otherwise, like you said, their past difficulties have been for nothing, and their future hope is gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is even worse. They have nothing to look forward to, nothing that's going to make it all okay in the end.
They've
That's
given
the
it
fundamental.
Up for heaven, they've sacrificed everything for a place in heaven. And if your God doesn't exist and there's no heaven, then you've just got to fight for the belief, because otherwise it all becomes meaningless again.
Also, the other aspect of why they don't accept other people's gods could be because Blue is very much about a second person perspective. And I think at a second person perspective, truth is defined as what your group or your collective that you identify with, your we, is telling you is the truth. So somebody else's we lies outside of your we, lies outside of your collective, and it's only your collective that can be true, not somebody else's collective. That would put you into fourth person perspective if you had to, start looking at other people's truths as being equally valid. And Blue is nowhere near ready for that. Blue is very second person perspective. This is my group. What they say is true. So an Orthodox Christian, the Eastern Orthodox Church, or Roman Catholics, even better example, they write out the dogmas and you believe them. You don't question them, you believe them. Somebody from a different church, somebody's a Protestant or a non-Christian religion, they must be wrong because they're outside the church. There is salvation only in the church. There's salvation only in my second person perspective.
Yeah. That's what it becomes. That's what it becomes, isn't it? Story.
Yeah. That's high Blue.
Yeah. And then again, sort of because of the suffocation of the yin extreme, as it were, it swings back to the next level of yang. So red under the influence of blue becomes orange. Yeah, and at that point we've injected the transcendent in blue. So
yes, for the first time, yes.
The sense of striving towards something that you can't see or seem to have yet. So but at the same time, because it's the yang-based system, the individual needs to be liberated from the collective belief of blue. So rather than to take it on faith, no, I'm going to check it out for myself, see if it's true, right? Hence scientific rationalism, the microscope, telescope. Like, can we see it? Can we really see it, touch it around us? Is it real?
Yes. Can we verify it? Can we test it?
Yeah. And then I think
at Blue.
Yeah, go ahead.
At Blue, we have theism, what they call theism. So you've got a God, you've got the universe. God is other. God is the creator. But God interacts with his creation. So, he helps you, he protects you, he rewards you, he punishes you. You can pray and ask for help and ask for favors. But unlike the magic of purple and red, where if you do the ritual correctly, you'll get the result, hopefully. Here, it's very much down to the will of the creator. You could pray for whatever you want, but if it's not what the one true God wants, you're not going to get it. You have to be subservient to his will. Whereas in purple and red magic, especially red magic, you're making the universe subservient to your will. You become the godlike figure. In blue, you're subservient to the godlike figure now.
Yeah. And in orange, interestingly, everybody becomes a god. Everybody becomes right? It's like you can make it on your own. You go for it, you can get to the top. So so there's no kind of faith in something else. You just have to work on it and prove it. So it's spirituality in your definition, which was something beyond or other. That maybe it is. Maybe it's just progress. Maybe the other or the beyond is the striving towards. Oh, you know what I wanted to do actually? Also, I wanted to, when we go just in blue for a sec, wanted to take a moment and think. So if we had this. So I'm making the argument that we had the split from purple to red that we talked about before, and that what that did is that is what made for the conditions that the blue, all the different blue systems would fight each other, because we had lost that fundamental experience of interconnectedness, of it all being connected, that we had beige purple.
Yes.
So had that split not happened, and this kind of speculation then, and blue emerged in a healthy context, you could still have got this kind of transcendent movement of order, but you wouldn't have had to destroy somebody else's order. So you wouldn't have had the absolutism.
Yeah.
You would have had the greater level of order, greater than purple, because it transcends more, makes sense of more. But it wouldn't have had to fight the other.
Right. So you'd have had a more tolerant blue,
Exactly.
where different blue systems can peacefully live together.
So the bridge then is when you come across the orange in the unhealthy system, where you've got this kind of trauma of disconnection and unrootedness from the past, and everybody's literally racing to get to the top, racing to compete, racing to be the best. Whereas if that interconnectedness and that sense of, there is a kind of sense of fate, destiny, or other forces at play, a humility that I can't, there's not just me, there's actually all sorts of other stuff going on, then orange would have, yes, liberated the individual, but liberated the individual to play the game in a kind of fun, creative way, and noticed, oh yeah, look, that person's done it better than me, how can I learn from them? But there wouldn't have been the angst of failure, or the angst of not making it, or the stress of working from 6 a.m. till 12 at night, because you've got to be the best and you've got to get there. There would you'd have parallel with it a sense of humility that, well, I'm going to play the game and do, but now it's time to rest. And so what? And so what if the other person gets ahead of me? Well, I'm going to watch them and learn from it, and then move on next. So the moment that we had started, we would have actually been kept an openness to the feedback systems from the planet and from our stress and lack of well-being, that would have told us, oh, we need to slow down. We need to reconsider our actions, because we wouldn't have got caught in this kind of non-stop chase after progress. But in the one that we have, what was orange spirituality?
I mean, I would say one possibility is, at blue we have theism, so we have God as other, but God is the creator of the world, but God is interacting with the world. What we could have in orange is theism becomes deism, which means God creates the world, but then he just disappears. He doesn't actually interact with the world anymore. He just sets it into motion with the laws of motion, which scientists then discover. And then that's it. He just kind of goes away and kind of watches it from a distance, but doesn't actually. So there's no use praying to such a God. He's not going to help you or protect you or punish you or reward you. He's a disinterested observer, having made this universe. So that's kind of more consistent with orange, because what orange would say is there's no evidence at all that God interacts with the world. Prayers don't work, and there's no way we can verify this whole reward and punishment nonsense. But we do have a very orderly universe, a universe that seems to be very finely tuned for life. So we could speculate, even at orange, that there is some kind of intelligence behind it. But that intelligence is just the ground of all being, out of which these laws of nature manifest. But it's not like a person who's going to help you.
Right.
It's just this underlying order. So this recognition of an underlying order, the underlying laws of nature, may be some kind of supreme mind that created or put into motion these laws of nature, but who's not somebody that you can have a relationship with.
Right. It's objective.
That could be a possible spirituality at orange. So it's the admiration and discovery of the laws of nature, the laws of the theorems of mathematics, that becomes the religion of orange. So Isaac Newton, he said that God speaks to us through two books. There's the Bible, which is blue. Well, that's not, Isaac Newton didn't say which is blue. He said it's the Bible, and there's the laws of creation. So he was looking at a blue source and an orange source. Because I think Isaac Newton sits right bang in the middle of where blue becomes orange.
Yeah, that whole era.
And
yeah.
So
what about things like, do you know the book or the now that's coming out as a film, The Secret?
Yes, I know The Secret, yes.
That feels
Rhonda Byrne.
Orange, because it's about
yeah.
If we take this science of there being another dimension to reality, then, and the interconnectedness of everything, then with our minds we can make it work for us. So we can basically, if you learn to use your intention properly, you can manipulate the lottery, or you can manifest your Lamborghini or whatever it is, kind of thing. So it's another way to get ahead in the material world.
Right.
The way to get ahead in the material world. So that content of parapsychology gets translated through the code of orange as, I'm going to use your consciousness to, get the life you want, kind of thing. So I don't know whether that counts as spirituality, but it is framed as something beyond.
Well, yeah. It is a kind of spirituality. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a strong element of red in that as well. It's a kind of a red stroke orange, because these are very egotistical, entirely self-serving goals that one is working towards in The Secret. And also you could probably use orange methodologies to demonstrate that it doesn't actually work. It doesn't always work. There's plenty of people who go through these manifestation processes and they don't get exactly what they want. It's not always as simple as that.
That's true. So there's a lot of blue faith in there as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Want to believe it.
But I think the kind of goals that people go for with something like The Secret is very much orange. It's orange driven. They use it for material goals often, a lot of the time. Yeah. The other type of spirituality that we could say is orange, largely orange, is early Buddhism and Krishnamurti, because it's the essence of the scientific method is to observe reality objectively without your own subjective material, your own subjective conditioning, distorting that perception. And that's exactly what Krishnamurti is all about. Free yourself from your conditioning and have a direct perception of reality, which is really just the scientific method in spiritual talk.
Yeah, interesting.
And early Buddhism, I mean, in the Buddha, while he was alive, Buddhism morphed into different forms, but early Buddhism was very much about rejecting the purple and red religions of the time. Sorry, the red and blue religions of the time. And each person discovering the truth for themselves through their own direct perception of reality, without authority, without scripture,
right?
Through the purification of their own minds, so they could perceive clearly. So that's the other way an orange spirituality could go, that the goal is to perceive clearly.
Yeah, good point. I think that might have also been an example of that might also have been Quakerism initially.
Oh, yes.
When the Quakers emerged in northern England, what they were rebelling against was the authority hierarchy of the church that was saying, God can only come through the priest, and the Quakers was, no, God is everywhere and in everybody. And so a Quaker service, when you sit in circle in a Quaker service, the reason it's called Quakerism is because the idea is that you speak when spirit quakes in you. So you sit there, and the moment that you feel the quaking, you feel moved to speak, then you allow spirit to speak through you. So anybody can have that kind of expression. And of course, it then also then took on very quickly a lot of the green value system aspects. But I think it probably came out of that orange rebellion against the blue hierarchical system and the focus on the individual being allowed access to it. Yeah, interesting.
Oh no, I think that's exactly right. I think Quakerism, first of all, there was the emphasis on each individual expressing the truth in their own way. So that shows in the way they do their meetings in their friends' houses. They also had a strong sense of social justice.
Yeah.
So I think when the blue Christian groups were massacring the American Indians, the Quakers often hid them and looked after them. They fought against slavery. So all the terrible things that were going on, often spearheaded by the pilgrims who had come over, which is like the blue. Yes, exactly. The blue reformed Calvinist Christianity that was there that had come over from Europe, from mainland Europe. I think the Quakers rebelled against a lot of the things that blue reformed Christianity was doing. They fought against slavery, women's rights. I think they had quite a lot of emphasis on women being able to be preachers as well as men. They didn't have this strict literal belief in the Bible in the way Reformed did. They hid, like I said, they hid American Indians when.
Well, if you think about it, Orange was really about the liberation of the individual, and every individual should have the chance to make it, in its pure essence.
Exactly.
Every individual should have the chance to make it, which is why, Orange fought against slavery, and those, because they didn't believe people should be kept down. Everybody should be allowed to explore their own highest potential, essentially.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah, nice.
So in religious terms, in spiritual terms, I think we get freedom from religious and spiritual authority for the first time.
Yeah, the ability, kind of people being able to have a direct connection again or explore their own form of spirituality, and that being okay, that being interesting, in fact, interesting to compare them. It's another kind of comparative studies of religions and a more scientific approach to the, different experiences that people were having and things.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, so then we get tired. Then we get tired of this individualistic race to the top. We sit back and we either burn out or we catch ourselves before we do, and we realize that there's that our inner peace, well-being, and harmony is more important than another car or a bigger house. And that's when this green kind of harmony-driven system, as the yin starts to infuse the yang again, and we come back to the other side with this we relationship focus. What Orange has really done is release the diversity into the system. Orange has liberated the individuals, as we were just saying. And then green emphasizes that and focuses on each individual having their own inner truth, basically, and no one truth being better than any other truth.
Exactly.
Really, as a kind of massive contrast to the previous we system in blue, which is one truth versus another truth. And the search for that experience, I think it becomes experiential again. More religion or spirituality becomes experiential, where it's search for the inner experience of God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, because we're all allowed to call it whatever we want.
Yes, exactly.
In green. Yeah.
So I think spiritually speaking, this is where we start to say things like all religions are just different paths up the same mountain. They all go to the same summit at the top.
Yeah.
Each person has to find their own path. We're all on different paths, but we all end up in the same place.
Yeah.
God makes himself known through many different ways and many different names to different seekers. And
makes herself known in many different ways.
Herself, of course. So we rediscover the feminine spirituality that we suppressed at purple.
Yeah.
Suppressed at red, sorry. It was there at purple and we suppressed it at red. Hence your evolution model, red and green, maybe.
Yes.
And I think green mystics can still belong to one specific religion, but they no longer see that religion as better in any way.
And you get so, the council of religions or the council of churches who
exactly
they all practice their own, but they respect that different religions have their own traditions and stories, culturally specific stories, which are just as valid and equal as their own.
Just as valid, and all end up in the same place, and maybe they're all saying the same thing in different ways.
Yeah.
So I mean, a great example of this is the Hindu mystic Ramakrishna, who lived in the 19th century, and now he was a Hindu, and he was a Hindu mystic, and he was a worshipper of the goddess, of Kali, the goddess. But he had this firm conviction that all religions and all paths lead to God, that they're all just different paths to the same enlightenment at the pinnacle. And he decided to devote his life to actually proving that in his own experience. So he studied under masters of many different religions for several years at a time. So, for example, he practiced Hinduism under different schools and deities for several years. And then he practiced Christianity for several years. He practiced Sufism, Islam for several years. And he practiced, I don't know if he practiced Buddhism or not, but he practiced different schools of Hinduism that some would have been meditative like Buddhism, some would have been worship. And what he concluded after 20 or 30 years of doing this is that they all end up in the same, that they all end up leading to the same experience of God, the same experience of enlightenment at the end of their journey. So he actually proved that to himself, to his own satisfaction in his own life. And he had a lot of opposition, I think, at the time from very orthodox Hindus. But he introduced this kind of green notion. And I think in Christianity, to some extent, we see that with the Second Vatican Council of Catholicism, where it was admitted in the Second Vatican Council that it's not quite green, it's kind of orange stroke green, that even though there is no salvation outside of the church, God makes himself known to all peoples in different ways. And even though the church is kind of the best way, if you like, that doesn't mean everybody else is wrong. God has also made himself known in different ways through nature, through conscience, in other traditions. And so the Second Vatican Council became a decisive step in Catholicism becoming more tolerant towards other religions. At least in theory, that was what happened.
No, I was just pondering again this experiment with green around the split and the non-split. So we know that the green shadow is this kind of ungrounded tolerance of everything. So even like if a fundamentalist was to sit in the group and express their opinion and then attack others and try to undermine things, then, well, ultimately it's their perspective, and we have to allow all the diversity to coexist. That, I think, and this is just a conjecture, that that's a very ungrounded form of green, right? It's like a disembodied form that is disconnected from the reality somehow, but kind of hovers in this ethereal realm of trying to create this harmony between everything, and therefore refusing to see the developmental aspects and the different levels of morality. Whereas I think if it had got those beige purple roots still, would have meant a more grounded green that would have been willing to draw boundaries to protect the whole. Whereas ungrounded or unrooted green doesn't know what to do with it. Doesn't know what to do with fundamentalists, because it's an opinion, and surely it also has its place. Yeah,
Yes,
would
yes.
be able to make those useful distinctions because it's not embodied, because it's cut off the body. It's a very
Right,
kind of rational or abstract form of diversity, not a grounded, embodied sense.
Yes, exactly.
I
I mean, one way to see it is that green understands and embraces and honors diversity, but it does so without any discrimination.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why
Lost its boundaries. It's
yeah.
like a river that doesn't have any banks, it just goes and then it doesn't go anywhere, right? So you need to bring the banks in, the boundaries back in again, because that's in a way, I can actually feel it more in my body than describe it. But when you got that beige purple grounding, it enables you to actually hold the banks, hold boundaries. Whereas
exactly.
green, when it's ungrounded and hasn't healed that split, has this kind of boundarylessness to it.
And I think that the danger of that is that green ends up inadvertently empowering dangerous forms of spirituality and dangerous groups of people, because it's trying so hard to listen to everybody and give equal rights to everybody, that it ends up giving equal rights to people who don't believe in equal rights.
Exactly.
And so there's this strange kind of contradiction in green. It actually is self-destructive. It actually, by following its prime directive, it ends up destroying its own prime directive. There's a profound contradiction at the heart of green, like there is at the heart of every level, I think. Which is why the next level needs to emerge. I mean, one way of looking at this is that the next level needs to emerge to resolve that fundamental.
It's always the case. The next level emerges to resolve the problems created by the previous one.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a fundamental incompleteness or performative contradiction in each level, which needs to be resolved. So even with green.
Because what green has done is it's pulled in all the diversity and put it in front of us, and now yellow needs to do something with it, to actually make it of use to the world, like put it in service to the world. So yellow becomes where green's not very effective, and I think this is the shadow green, the unrooted green, I would say, is not effective in getting things done. Because it's more concerned with process and including everybody than actually achieving a result. Yellow then is, but guys, look at the state of the world right now.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to actually do something with all of this and get some action going.
That demands intelligent discrimination rather than just including everybody without.
Yeah.
Hello, are you there?
Oh, I seem to have lost you. There you go.
Oh, okay. Back. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. I'd say functional discrimination. So
yes, exactly.
Yellow's very about, who's the best person to do this? Who do we need to work together in order to achieve this result for the good of the whole?
Yes.
So spirituality. I think at yellow it seems that it's on the one level, it takes that green diversity and realizes that in order to make a positive impact in the world, you have to have your own practice of some kind, your own inner work, because realizes that what goes on in here is what you create out there. So that's, you've got to take that seriously. And so it comes with a responsibility, and choose whichever path fits you, as long as you have that discipline, and that commitment on the one hand.
So when we have this shift from green to yellow, in spiritual terms, one way of thinking of that is becomes the birth of the evolutionary impulse, what Andrew Cohen calls the evolutionary impulse, because we now no longer we don't see the world purely in horizontal terms now. It's not that everybody's just equal and we all just need to embrace everybody, because most people don't want to do that. See, it's what green just can't see is that it has all these wonderful, noble intentions that, we're all brothers and sisters and the world has to be united, and we all love each other and we're all just people and etc. And it seems to think that if you just tell this to everybody, everybody's just going to get it and join the party. But 90% of people in the world don't believe that and probably don't even want that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where yellow emerges, because it starts to see that actually, yes, we have to include everybody, but everybody has different levels of understanding of this.
Comes like a very realistic spirituality in a way.
Exactly, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting though, at the same time, yellow does seem to, so what I've noticed anyway in the integral movement, where people show up at conferences and, you know, formally are all talking about integral theory, but in the coffee bar, you're all talking about the latest shamanic course you went on. So there is that, like I kind of described in evolution theory, there is this kind of reintegration of that understanding of the interconnectedness of everything, but this time post-cognitively.
Right.
And I think the reason maybe there is often people go back there is because of the split, right? Is because in ourselves we become aware of the separation that's happened, of how we've cut that piece of ourselves off. And so we need to get back into that to kind of reawaken it and realign it, to reintegrate it into ourselves. Because I think we realize that maybe that's in the transition to turquoise. I was going to say that I think yellow is the last of the cognitively driven systems.
Yes, yes.
It does all this systems thinking. It kind of tries to connect everything up, but at some point it also realizes that you can't connect everything up, and actually there's a limit to the way the cognitive mind can deal with the complexity of the challenges that we're facing in the world, and so is therefore pulled towards a quest to find something more than, you know, systems theory and systems thinking and all this great kind of interconnecting cognitive stuff, which is what draws it back to the mysticism more, I think.
Right.
Yes,
I think yellow at high yellow, we reach the pinnacle of conceptual thinking, as far as conceptual mind can go, really. And I think one example of that is the notion of the holon, what Ken Wilber calls the holon. I think holonic thinking is high yellow thinking. This is, you're reaching the pinnacle of where conceptual thinking can actually go. But in spiritual terms, I think yellow, we realize that different people are at different levels of development. And that's inclusive because everybody's included in that. Everybody's somewhere on that scale. But it's not naive, as green was. That it's inclusive, but it's also differentiates intelligently between different levels of understanding. And so the prime directive, the spiritual impulse, I think, of yellow becomes to evolve. Because if we have these different levels of development, it's development, not only ours, but of everybody. Development is one of the things that's going to help us here.
You know, so I'll just check on that, because when I hear Don Beck talking about spiral dynamics, you know, he says the key is not to get everybody to yellow. So in that case, we could say it's not to evolve everybody to yellow. Like Claire Graves's famous quote was, "Everybody has a right to be who they are, damn it." Right? The prime directive of the spiral is to create habitats and life conditions for people based on where they are at on the spiral that enables them to express their current value system in a healthy way for life as a whole.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
For some people, that will lead to them having excess energy over to evolve. For others, they're just quite happy to sit and be a really healthy blue, you know, or whatever.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. But so I think the evolution bit of that is the alignment of inner worlds and outer worlds, to make sure that inner value systems and motivations are aligned with habitats or contexts for a healthy life, essentially. Yeah.
I think that in a way there's two things then that a yellow spirituality is doing. It's looking back down, and it's
without judgment. Yeah, that's key.
Without judgment, yes, because like we said before, higher doesn't mean better in any sense. I mean, somebody whose center of gravity is yellow isn't a better person than somebody who's, his life is not of any more value in any fundamental sense.
It's about how well the inner value system matches the needs of the world around you. That's what defines whether appropriate fit or not. Yeah.
Yes. So I think the person who's, so I think what yellow does is yellow looks back down the levels and does two things. It will create means for people to develop if that's appropriate for them. And it will create means for people to be healthier at the level that they're at if that's appropriate for them. So translation and also transformation. Looking down and looking up for itself personally, perhaps. It's at yellow that somebody might, for the first time, awaken their own evolutionary impulse and say, hey, I want to actually see how far I can develop, because I've got in touch with my own developmental drive, which in some way
mirrors that, Nishad. I'm not sure. That sounds very orange to me.
Does it?
Because I've had just kind of from my experience of like communities I've been in around human emergence and things here, is actually what happens as yellow reaches its limit is a massive surrender.
Okay.
So not a great urgency to suddenly develop to the next thing, but a realization that we can't work it all out ourselves. That there is a bigger system, consciousness, whatever, at work that we're a part of, that we have a role in and can be co-creators of to some extent. But that we can't control it. We have no control over the destiny of the planet or the earth. There's a lot more going on, but we do have our role to play. And there's something in that surrender that releases the struggle of the cognitive mind to become, which is the Krishnamurti bone bit, right, that I was also reading just earlier. His whole thing was this constant need to become, right, to move on. Whereas, and because that's what puts us in linear time and puts us in the rational mind. So to go from becoming more to being, I guess, which doesn't mean you don't do, but it means that you do from a different place. So I think what happens is that there's a surrender of the drive to try to be better, to try to be able to solve all the world's problems, which is yellow is desperate to do. And in that release and surrender, there is a relaxation into the present and a connection to the consciousness of the rest of reality, because it's when we relax and we quieten the mind, that's when we connect to the source in a way in ourselves that's connected to the source of everything else. And that's when we can start to, and I think the way it works then is what we described earlier in this proprioception idea, is that then insight comes in. Then we're driven by insight that moves us to act, but in a way that isn't attached to the outcome. It's like, boom, this is what I need to do now. Boom, I do it. And then the data comes back at you, as it were, from the result of your action. Boom, you kind of sit with that, and then insight comes in for the next step. So it's very much living in a flow where the cognitive mind has a role to play in helping you to implement it, but isn't in the lead. Like insight and heart-based wisdom, I would say, is in the lead, as it were. And then there really is actually, in my experience, no struggle to evolve. It's really funny. There
Well,
is
it happens naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, yes. Something happens. But I find is when I'm like, if I'm in a yellow space, busy kind of doing stuff, it actually moves a lot more slowly than when I'm in a turquoise space, because stuff just flows.
Yes, stuff just, yeah.
Not in a way that I can explain.
Well, it's not. It's not, one is not doing it consciously or deliberately anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If there's anything you're doing deliberately, it's being available, essentially.
Okay, let me play the devil's advocate here briefly. Yeah. If we say that the drive to evolve that I was suggesting tentatively can be there at yellow, and you're suggesting that's there's quite a lot of orange in that. There's this kind of strive that's there in orange. Yeah.
I agree it's there in yellow.
Okay.
I'm saying what happens is at the end of yellow, it dissolves.
Right. Okay. Well, then, oh yeah, we're in agreement there then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think that
this is important. The reason that drive to evolve is there in yellow is not because I want to be the best, but it's because I want to be of greatest service.
Exactly.
So I know that I can be of greatest service if I clear out my shadow, do my work, make sure I'm clear and aligned every day, then I can have a greater impact on the world. So it's really that's why exactly right. I have that evolution. It's the impulse to evolve, to be of greatest service, to make the most of the life I have for the good of the whole, essentially. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the evolutionary impulse isn't about beating other people. It's not. No. It's about being able to, like you said, be of the greatest service to the whole. And what you were saying about it's not something one does through drive, but through surrender. What I found in my experience, and also from my reading of Aurobindo, who I think was the great evolutionary mystic, is there's no conflict there between the two. It's through surrender that we evolve.
Yeah.
Because it's not we're not doing the evolving. We're not evolving ourselves. We can't, because evolution means the emergence of things that weren't there before. That can't come from within us deliberately, consciously, by intent. So we surrender to whatever we want to call it. I mean, Aurobindo in his Hindu language called it the Divine Mother. But we can call it many different things. We surrender to something that is beyond us, something that is coming from beyond yellow.
Life process.
We surrender to that thing, that power, that being, that ground, that triggers in us a development, rather than us saying, well, I'm going to develop now and try to develop, because that's meaningless. That wouldn't have any, there's no sense in saying that.
Yeah. Or it triggers, and the one thing, so this is the kind of context for evolution, really. Is what we still find ourselves in is a linearity of language in terms of development and evolution.
Oh yeah.
So in my evolution, the talk I did for the Integral European Conference, I think I started off with a proposal that maybe rather than us moving through space-time, that space-time moves through us.
Right, exactly.
And, changes as it does. But I guess I'm just kind of highly conscious of how our language is still all about, evolve, develop, whereas there's a need to, that's what's
this goes back,
taking us out of, goes back to what we talked about before, out of the body, out of the material, keep moving faster and faster and faster that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes back to what we were talking earlier about the different kinds of time and how linear time is something. I think linear time starts to wind down at high yellow, and once we start talking about turquoise, we'll be talking in very different terms, I think.
Yeah, that's why it's I think that's probably a good place to stop in a minute, because we've got on actually for a while, but it was a good question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's. Why don't we can talk about turquoise spirituality to whatever extent we can.
Okay.
Next time we can continue from this next time.
Okay.